Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima, and both the games I was planning on doing videos on for this time slot were both delayed. So I get to show off Star Trek Voyager Elite Force instead. Thanks Activision and GOG for coming through on me with this one, because I was looking for something to talk about, and I'm genuinely surprised that I hadn't played this yet, because I'm actually a really big fan of Star Trek Voyager, specifically. I don't hate the Next Generation or the original. In fact, I don't mind them at all. I think they're pretty good. But Voyager was always my favorite for some reason, and I could not tell you why. But I have never actually gotten around to playing this game, despite the fact it's got a lot going for it, like being able to wander around a virtual Voyager, having all of the original voice cast in, and also just genuinely being a good game according to a lot of people on the internet. And thankfully, they re-released it for cheap, for $15 on GOG, and I bought it straight up. That's like $10 American, because I am Australian, if you couldn't tell by the incredibly cancerous voice. But anyway, this is a game that is set somewhere around Season 6. I'm not going to claim to be a massive Star Trek nerd to the point where I read this on a wiki, and I'm amazed that someone picked up on this, but in the virtual Voyager mode that they include in this game, during the series, Harry Kim's quarters is on Deck 6, but in this game they put it on Deck 2. So there are some minor details like that they don't get right, and I'm not the sort of nerd that knows these things off the top of my head. The only reason I brought that one up was because I thought it was amusing, but the broad strokes of this game and its atmosphere are absolutely excellent. Whether it be like the menu system that is duplicating the whole LCAR's menu system that they've got going on in the original series, and, well, not the original series, sorry, but Next Generation onwards. Whether it be the voice acting, because they got all of the original voice actors back, and they all do a really good job. In fact, it actually kind of hurts the game a bit, because you can tell who wasn't on the show originally, because their voice actors are just a step or two below the original actors. So as soon as they open their mouth, you realize, oh, that they weren't actually on Voyager. But anyway, and just the atmosphere, not only of Voyager, because you get to, not only in the main campaign, you get to explore it a little bit, but you also get to explore it as part of the virtual Voyager mode, is excellent. It looks just like the ship. The places that you get to go to, like the sick bay, or the bridge, or even things like the quarters of the individual officers. They all fit the theme in broad strokes perfectly. And apparently this was something Raven Software were really good at this point in their lifespan. These days they've just been relegated to a Call of Duty support studio, like literally everybody under Activision for some reason. Because apparently all Activision wants to do is Call of Duty. But there you go. But it's not even just Voyager. Like, in part of this campaign, you get to wander around what's basically an amalgamation of Star Trek races all coming together and making a space station out of individual starships. And you get to see things like a Klingon bird of prey, or a warbird or something like that. Again, I'm not a massive Star Trek nerd, I don't know exactly what these are. You get to go to the original generation's mirror universe, which is great. That's something I wasn't expecting to see. You get to see the Hirogen ship, the Malon ship, and they're all done really well as well. And the Borg cubes, of course, because it wouldn't be a Star Trek Voyager game if they didn't have the Borg in there. But it even comes down to, like, the video cutscenes and the way they just handle specific things. Like when you first start the game, how back in the original Voyager series, they would have like the little intertitles that would come up in the top left that would say the episode of the title, and they do that in this game too, and it just warmed my heart just a little bit, because those are just, it's just the attention to detail that you really like to see when it comes around to a game like this, which is very clearly trying to duplicate another IP, and it's been done so well that as a fan of Star Trek Voyager, I've been getting a massive kick out of this. It even comes down to the really minor things, like I was playing a quick game of the deathmatch with the AI bots. It was on Voyager. It had Captain Janeway, Tuvok, 7 and 9, etc. all running around shooting at each other. And Tuvok came around the corner with this grenade launcher and just melted my face off. And then a voice clip played, and it was his voice actor saying, "You lack mental discipline." And I just thought that was the best thing. I know, it's just... I'm not a nerd, I swear. I just thought that was a really nice touch. Hell, he's even your guide in the training level, which teaches you the absolute basics, and it works so well. Especially when you load into, like, a deathmatch level, and it's just the holodeck, but then it just fades into your initial spawn point. It's so well done. It's all so well done, and I genuinely give Raven Software thumbs up, because it's that alone which makes this worth playing if you're even remotely a fan of Star Trek, because it's just done so well. With that said, though, let's get on to talking about the actual gameplay, because it's kind of the elephant in the room that I've been ignoring for some time. And if you couldn't tell by the footage that's been playing in the background for the last 6 minutes, it's a first-person shooter. You wander around with Star Trek-ish weaponry, you blow the crap out of a bunch of enemies, and you move on. It's a very linear campaign. There's very little in the way of exploring to do, there's very little in the way of secret hunting, or sub-objectives, or anything along those lines. And so, as a result, the game really needs to rely on its shooting, which is not bad, but certainly not great. And I can kind of understand why, because it's Star Trek, and if you've even watched one episode of Star Trek, you know what combat is like in Star Trek. It's some of the most clumsiest hand-to-hand combat you've ever seen, and anything that's ranged is basically point, gun at thing, laser comes out in perfectly straight line, whatever is there dies. So they kind of have to take some creative liberties, like giving all of the people who attack at range this scavenger rifle, which resembles a more first-person shooter-esque weapon. And you get things like the phaser, of course, which is like an infinite energy weapon, which is actually kind of a nice touch, just because you can pull it out when you don't want to use extra ammo for anything. And there are a bunch of weapons, and they all have two differing fire modes, and the way that you increase their ammunition, increase. What the hell is increase, brain? The way you increase their ammunition is by finding ammo dumps and little terminals on the side. Same thing with your health. It all gets refilled via terminals. And it's a very linear game. So you're just going through, grabbing these terminals and shooting at a lot of enemies on the way. There is a stealth section or two, which is pretty nice, but they're actually kind of easy to just, like, get spotted and kill everything. Even on the difficulty I was playing on. I wasn't playing on the highest difficulty, but I was playing on the second highest, so... Because the weapons are all alright, but the problem is there's a lot of duplicates. Because a lot of the weapons do exactly the same thing sometimes. Whether it be like, you'll have like the shotgun weapon, and then you'll have another weapon which has a secondary fire which acts a lot like a shotgun. You'll have the compression rifle, which has the alternate fire of being like a really strong sniper shot, and then you've got like two other weapons that do exactly the same thing. There's very little variety in the way that the weapons work, which isn't that big of a deal, but then you come along to the enemy AI, which, considering how linear this game is, you're going to be in a lot of hallways. You're going to be in a lot of small enclosed rooms with a lot of cover. And that's pretty much long and short of the combat encounters you'll be having. And the AI is actually kind of stupid. It's very likely to just charge in a line directly at you, or just kind of move to the left and right, try and find cover, and then continue shooting at you. That's the entirety of the enemy AI. And it's not that fun to fight. It's generally just lean around the corner and take shots if they're ranged, or if they're melee, just backpedal and fire away with the phaser's secondary fire, and they'll all die eventually. And as a result, I was kind of becoming a bit bored of the firefights in this as I was going through. There's still a fair amount of the campaign to go, but it just doesn't have that much going for it in the way of interesting combat, at least in the first couple of hours. And as a result, I found myself getting a little bit bored. I was mainly holding on for the just great atmosphere and just general Voyager, I was going to say schematics there, but what the hell does that have to do with anything? Just the general Voyager crew and atmosphere that they've got going on with it. And they give you a couple of nice touches to work with as well, even during the campaign. Like, the best combat scenarios that you get are the holodeck training simulations. Every time you find yourself back on Voyager and you're about to go off on another mission, you have the option to step into the holodeck, and you'll get to do a bit of a combat simulation there where you've got a lot of enemies coming down on you at once. And those are the most fun parts of the game, just because you need to prioritize your targets, find appropriate cover, use the right weapon for the job, because they're usually all up in like really high places or taking cover or something like that. And it's usually quite effective in making an interesting challenge, which is a shame that the main campaign so far hasn't done that for me. I'm something like, there's like 8 missions in the game. Missions, quote unquote. They say there's over 30 missions, but I think they count everything in between loading screens as a mission. And they have a lot of those, but they only last a few minutes at a time. Thankfully, of course, we're playing this on modern hardware, so it loads within a couple of seconds, so it's not that much of a flow killer. But yeah, they really have something like 8 missions. And they are all pretty long. And they would give you a decent amount of playtime for the $10 US you would want to be paying for this, as part of the GOG re-release, of course. But I'm just saying, the enemy AI and the overly linear design of the game makes it all just a little bit repetitive after a while. Just because of the amount of backtracking, just because of the amount of just hiding behind a corner and shooting that you'll be doing. You do have enough health to kind of go out there and shoot away if you like, but on this difficulty in particular, if more than 2 enemies decide to come down on you while you're doing this, it's gonna suck. And there is some variety in the campaign. You do get a stealth mission, but yeah, I'm just saying, the enemy AI is not that good. And the most reason you'll be overwhelmed is because there'll be so many of the enemies that they'll just be firing on you with ridiculous amounts of firepower, and that'll be it, and you'll just be done. Which is a shame, really, but again, I find it kind of hard to blame Raven for this. I mean, they had Star Trek to work with, and this was, like, original Star Trek, not Discovery Star Trek, where it's all so over the top with its violence that it kind of loses the influence of what made the original Star Trek great in the first place. But I digress. So on top of the main campaign, you also get the mode that was added in the expansion, which is Virtual Voyager, which is basically just an extra 2 hours of getting to wander around Voyager itself. You get to go and have a look at the personal files of the people in question. You get to go find the command codes, which unlocks extra parts of the ship. You get to find weird little items and action figures just lying around the place. And they also include things like a bunch of new holodeck things, where it's a couple of new combat scenarios, but they didn't really do anything to fix the AI, although there's a couple of neat surprises in there. And there's a few little secrets to find, like finding your way to Deck 15 and seeing how the guy down there is just slowly losing his mind, which is kind of the thing they touched on in the show in one of the best episodes of it, actually, and it's kind of great. But again, it only lasts like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and some of the new holodeck scenarios are awful, like the Tranquil Garden, which again just has a bunch of AI that just runs straight at you. And there's also the Captain Proton one, which I thought would be great, but then it turned out to be one of the most boring levels in the entire series. The entire game, where it's literally just a really long set of corridors with the same sort of AI with very little cover to work with, so it just becomes a really simple point and shoot.
Thanks, Monroe.
So yeah, that was a little bit disappointing. I got a kick out of the Borg Slayer minigame because it seems like someone at Raven was having a huge amount of fun making that one happen. And it's fun being able to wander around Voyager and do a bunch of little things on it, but Admittedly, it feels a little bit insubstantial. So if you had to, like, buy the expansion in order to get Virtual Voyager separately on GOG, that would probably be an absolute no. But thankfully you do get it with the game, and you don't get to interact with the crew much either, because pretty much everyone, no matter what you do, when you go up and press E on them, will be like, hey Monroe, and then that's it. Or can you leave me alone, I'm working. Which is fine, I guess. I mean, it is a game from 2000. What do I expect? But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't just a tiny bit of disappointment in there, that there wasn't a little bit more extra dialogue, but they probably didn't have the resources to get them all back to record voices for all of them, so... again, it's just kind of the limitations of a game of this era, of this budget, you know? There's only so much you can do, and they did like what they could with what they had, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't fun to wander around Voyager, get the computer codes, head up to the bridge, set off the self-destruct, and try and survive the 10-second countdown. That was great. Especially when Commander Chakotay takes so long to realize, like, hey, he actually plans on blowing up the ship. I should get up and shoot him before I bloody die. Which is weird, but okay. And then, on top of all that, you've also got a full multiplayer suite. Although, I say full suite with, quotation marks around the side, because you only get 3 modes: Deathmatch, Team Deathmatch, and Capture the Flag. And you can also play them all with bots, though, which does admittedly help out a lot. Because the bots are actually alright. There's not really that big of a problem with them. Although, it's clearly designed around an engine that was meant for more free-flowing and agility-focused combat. So again, it just kind of suffers from all of the weapons being relatively similar to each other, but I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't having fun with the few matches of multiplayer that I played, because they include like 30 maps and a ton of different AI bots to work with, so you can play, like, you can go as a Borg against nothing but the Voyager crew if you like, or you can play as a bunch of Cardassians, and they included, like, again, the expansion, so some of those maps are actually fan maps, and they're actually really good. So... I don't have a problem with the game's multiplayer suite. I just wish there was a little bit more to it, because this game came out in 2000, and then Perfect Dark came out in 2001, and just had so much more to it. And that was on the N64 of all things. But yeah, I did like the multiplayer, and again, it's got like the voice quotes going on from all of the characters of the game as well, so it's like, it does a good job of feeling like this crazy deathmatch on the Voyager decks. So yeah, that was my opinions on Star Trek Voyager Elite Force. It gets the atmosphere perfect. The voice acting is really well done. The levels are very well modeled. They absolutely feel like Star Trek. And the just general voice acting as well, that's great. And as a fan of Star Trek Voyager, being able to wander around Voyager itself is just great. And they've put a lot of effort into getting some of the little details right, although the absolute Star Trek nerds are probably going to find some things to be annoyed by. The shooting is okay, but it's kind of let down by some really bad enemy AI. The campaign is very linear. It does have a little bit here and there to distract you, like optional holodeck challenges and a stealth mission here and there, and things along those lines. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it somewhat, but it takes a bit of effort because of how simple the game is. The weapons themselves are okay, but again, Star Trek combat, there's only so much you can do, and they did an alright job for what they were working with. Virtual Voyager is a fun distraction, but it'll only last you a couple of hours before you found everything. And the multiplayer suite is actually pretty good. Gives you a lot of maps, gives you AI bots, and it just doesn't give you that much, it does give you a decent bit of time, but it's not something you'll keep coming back to. Maybe a few matches just let off a little bit of steam, but nothing else other than that. Would I recommend it? I mean, if you like Star Trek, yeah. If you're even remotely a fan of Star Trek, this is absolutely worth your time, just because of how well it does the theme and the atmosphere. But if you're just a fan of first-person shooters looking for a good first-person shooter, I'm a bit iffy on that. It's a decent campaign, but again, it's kind of let down by its AI and its lack of weapon variety. And if you're not a fan of either of these things, you should probably just stay away. This won't convince you. Still, I will get around to finishing the campaign eventually. And maybe having a couple more games of multiplayer, because, admittedly, my favorite memory of this game is playing the multiplayer. I can't remember if I said that in this take or the last take, but yeah. My favorite memory is playing the multiplayer, having the AI bot for Tuvok kill me, and then standing over my body and saying, "You lack mental discipline." Because that's something Tuvok absolutely would say, and it's great. It's good fun if you're a Star Trek fan. This has been Blue Maxima. I'll see you all next time.